Let's begin. Father in heaven, we're so grateful for another Tuesday where we can come together. And I'm grateful for the blessing that you've had upon this class. And I ask God that you'd speak to us now as we take a look at this last book of the historical books of the Old Testament, this book of Esther. So help us tonight, God, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, first of all, any questions on previous classes, ones that I have only been able to do to you by the miracle of video? Any questions on any previous classes? Yes?
I couldn't find Nehemiah.
Just put it up.
I just watched it today.
Monday.
Oh, just on Monday?
I think it got forgotten to put up, and then I talked to him on Sunday.
Okay,
It was up.
so it's up now.
Yeah, it's up now.
Through the Bible College website?
Through YouTube.
On YouTube. Okay. So apparently Nehemiah is presently up. Okay, any other questions from previous things? Any impressions? I got to say, I'm a little bit nostalgic here for this last night of the class. I've enjoyed this class. It's been a lot of work for me to prepare this, but I think it's been a blessing. I've kind of enjoyed going through, just taking a look at a book of the Bible a week and kind of doing a summary of it. So I've enjoyed that. Well, if it isn't little Corbin, come and visit us. Oh, better watch he doesn't run out the door. No, he's good. Okay, so as I mentioned, for the final, next week at 5 o'clock, those only who are taking the class for credit will need to show up. And the final will have two parts. One will be a long section where people and events will be listed in a random order, and then it's going to be your job to make that order chronological. Okay? So that'll be the first part, and then the second part is teacher surprise. I'm not going to tell you. Okay, let's talk about the book of Esther, shall we? Book of Esther is 10 chapters, 167 verses. It is one of the shorter books that we take a look at in our trip through these historical books of the Old Testament. The events of the book of Esther happen between chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra, if you're doing it chronologically, and it takes place before the events in the book of Nehemiah, I think. We'll take a look at the charts later on. It was written somewhere between 464 BC, that was the end of Ahasuerus' reign. Now, when you take a look at the literature surrounding the book of Esther, you will find it either the king described as Ahasuerus, as it's described in the biblical text, or sometimes Xerxes, because that was his secular name. It's the same guy, though, Ahasuerus or Xerxes. Somewhere between 464 and 435, that's when the palace at Susa was destroyed by fire, where all this stuff takes place. The historic and linguistic features don't support a date later than later, by that I really mean earlier than 400 BC, or after 400 BC. And then in 479 BC, Ahasuerus, that is Xerxes, was defeated by the Greeks at Salamis. Herodotus, a Greek historian, tells us that he sought consolation in his harem. This corresponds to the time period of Esther. I don't expect any of you watched it, but there was a movie that came out based on a graphic novel called 300, kind of talking about the battle between the Greeks and the Persians. Well, the Persian king that was involved in those great battles is this same king of the book of Esther, King Xerxes or Ahasuerus. So, this guy was a famous guy in ancient history. The first audience that it was written to was Jews who did not return to the land of Israel. In other words, we remind ourselves that there were hundreds of thousands of Jews exiled both under the Assyrians, that was the northern kingdom of Israel, and under the Babylonians, that was the southern kingdom of Judah. In both of those exiles, there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish people exiled, cast out of the land. How many approximately returned under Ezra and Nehemiah?
5%.
5%. I'm looking for a number. That's good. I'm okay with that, but I'm looking for a number.
40.
Yeah, close. together about 50,000. Together about 50,000, which turned out to be a small percentage, 5%, something like that, single-digit percentage number. So the vast majority of Jewish people had settled in these lands of exile. It would seem that the primary audience for this book was them, was those people. Esther's Hebrew name was Hadassah, meaning myrtle. Somebody ever met a woman named Myrtle? Anybody? Myrtle? Now, on my mom's side of the family, there were some weird names given to the women. I mean, just kind of really old-fashioned name. My grandmother's name, my mom's mom, was Gertrude. One of her sisters was Della. Another one was Ethel. And, what was another one? I forget. But, there's some kind of unusual names, but never a Myrtle. Now, what is a myrtle tree? I'm glad you asked that question. A myrtle tree looks like that. That's a myrtle tree in the Holy Land, which I guess is a nice-looking tree. I'll give you that. So Myrtle was her name. Her Persian name, Esther, comes from the Persian word for star, and it either means star, or some people boil it down even more and call it the morning star. Okay, star or morning star. And are you familiar with what the morning star is? Well, okay, that's biblically, but I mean astronomically. The morning star is the planet Venus. And they call it the morning star because it often shines brightly in the morning. Okay, the sun's light, whatever, the position of Venus, whatever. So the morning star is actually a planet, not a star, but it looks like a bright star in the sky. The key concept of the book of Esther is the concept of providence. Providence. Now, what do we mean by providence? Is there somebody who can give me a good description, a good definition of the term providence? And may I ask, let's ask one of our students, one of the people who are enrolled for credit in the class, because we got an awful lot of smart auditors. Let's ask one of the students. Can one of the students give me a definition of this word providence? I guess the answer to that question is no. I guess it can one is nobody.
Is it the same thing as provision?
No, it's not the same thing as provision. You could say the words are related, but it's not the same thing. Okay, well, good. It gives me an opportunity to talk about this. Providence refers to God's managing of history and human affairs. Divine providence is the way they work. In other words, it's the way that God manages and guides human affairs. It's the outworking of His will. Anybody think of a better definition? I'm kind of doing this spontaneously, but I think that's kind of what we're talking about with this. Now, actually, when you take a look at many of the founding fathers of the United States, they would talk about providence a lot because they saw that in the events of history, God's hand was moving. And so they would think about the providential hand of God. It's the evident way that the hand of God moves throughout the events of an individual human life or history. Now, this is why the book of Esther is a great book to talk about the providence of God. Friends, do you understand that the name God, the word God or the name of God is not mentioned once in the book of Esther? God is not specifically mentioned at all. Nowhere. Isn't that strange? That you got a book of the Bible that doesn't mention God? How can that be? Because what's really interesting, and I suppose the Holy Spirit deliberately intended this, that even though the word God or the name of God is not mentioned in the book of Hebrews, God is all over this book. I mean, all over it from beginning to end. You see the guiding hand of God at work through the story in really not just a wonderful way, but at times a really funny way as well, just a marvelous way from beginning to end. And so it almost highlights it. It's almost as if God says, I'm not going to name myself in this book. I'm just going to write myself all over it and show my hand at work throughout it. That is providence, the providential hand of God. Now, if we're going to talk about the key chapter in the book of Esther, we'd probably talk about Esther chapter 8, which describes the rescue of the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. We'll talk about that in just a moment when I read the summary of the book, okay? Because the summary will be important when we talk about the events. But you guys already know the events of the book of Esther, right? You read it. Everybody do the reading? You're happy to read Esther chapter 10, weren't you? And he said, my reading for the semester, it's done. He said, good, now I don't have to read the Bible for a long time. That's what he said, right? Right? No, you didn't say that. Of course you shouldn't say that. But you wrote out a sentence for each chapter, right? Right? Who wants to read me their sentence that they wrote out for Esther chapter 10? Somebody. Somebody read me the sentence they wrote out for Esther chapter 10. Oscar, go ahead, man. You're already doing it. Come on. It's a very short chapter, so I'm curious as to what you wrote for it. It's like a 3 or 4 verse chapter. Esther chapter 10.
He said, Mordecai seemed to grow greatly in status, being second only to the king.
Boom. There you go. Nice summary. Good job. Okay, so this is the key chapter of the book, the rescue of the people. Let's take a look at a couple key verses. Esther 4:14 and 8:17. Here's 4:14. This is what Mordecai, one of the characters in the book of Esther, says to his cousin Esther. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now actually, we kind of think of this as, almost a little bit of a tear-jerker, heroic statement. And it is a heroic statement. It's a heroic challenge, no doubt about it. But I want you to see that at the same time, it's a very cold statement. Esther, if you chicken out, God will save the Jews some way or another. Don't worry about that. But you know what? You and your father's house, you're going to go down. You're going to perish. But who knows, as he says at the end, whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And the whole idea is that God put Esther in a very unique position. And Mordecai challenged her to consider, am I not put in this unique position for a unique purpose? For something that I can accomplish in this position that perhaps someone else could not. And really, that is a very, what we call, transferable concept, is it not? Because I doubt if there's anyone here who is the number one wife in a Persian harem. Just checking. Okay, good. We're clear. Nobody here fits that description. But you have your own individual place in life right now, something that affords you certain responsibilities, certain opportunities. And that's something mindful for every person to consider. So that's one key verse. Another key verse would be Esther chapter 8, verse 17, sort of the resolution of the matter. It says, and in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. This was the result of God's deliverance upon the Jewish people. First of all, they established a great big party, a feast. And that party continues to this day. What do they call this whole party that they established in light of Esther's great victory? Please quiet Deborah. Yes? The Feast of Purim. That's right. Celebrated to this day. The Feast of Purim. That's right. And then it says as well, a feast and a holiday, and many of the people became Jews because of the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Okay, this is the good news. This is sort of the happily ever after of the story. Okay, a couple key verses. Book of Esther, author of the book. The first thing we have to notice is that no author for the book is named. So the correct answer to the question, who wrote the book of Esther, is? We don't know. We do know that the Holy Spirit inspired it, but we don't know the human author. However, there are some interesting things to consider. It seems that the author had knowledge of the customs and etiquette of the Persian royal court. That seems to be without controversy. Okay? He had knowledge of the customs and etiquette of the Persian royal court. Number two, the author probably lived during the events described and was an eyewitness to them, because the whole account reads as if it has an eyewitness flavor. And so it kind of has that thing. It's a fair summation to say that. Number three, it was written after the death of Ahasuerus, because Esther chapter 10, verses 2 and 3, speaks of his reign in the past tense. Shall we look at that? Now all the acts of his, that is Ahasuerus' power and his might, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to his countrymen. This speaks of Ahasuerus in the past tense. The book was probably, almost certainly written after his death. Now, many people suggest Mordecai as the author. That's possible. It's also possible that a later author wrote the book compiling records from Mordecai. It seems somewhat certain that Mordecai had something to do with the authorship of the book. He did keep records. Esther chapter 9, verse 20 says, "And Mordecai wrote and sent these things, letters to all the Jews near and far who were in the provinces of King Ahasuerus." So he was a man who wrote letters and wrote official things. It's not out of consideration that he wrote this. We also see this in chapter 10. It says, Ahasuerus, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which are they not written in the book of the Chronicles? For Mordecai the Jew was second, well received, seeking the good of his countrymen, speaking peace to his countrymen. He seems to be like the kind of guy who might have written this book, or at least been a significant contributor to it. Now, if Mordecai was not the author, his records were probably used as a significant source. Persian records also may have been used. In Esther chapter 2, verse 23, we read, "And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king." So, look, this was a well-established governmental system. They had a bureaucracy. They were into keeping records. It's no doubt that some of these records were probably consulted in the writing of the book. For example, it says in chapter 2, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? No doubt that they relied somewhat on these records when they wrote the book. Now on to the summary of the book. By the way, it looks like we might end a little bit early tonight. Is that painful to anybody? Should I just, really? You guys will get over it? Okay. All right. Well, then it's okay. I'm not going to try to hurry, but we'll take our time with this. The book of Esther summary. Esther is the remarkable story of how God used two Jewish people, a beautiful woman named Esther and her cousin named Mordecai, to save the Jewish people from genocide in the Persian Empire. It shows the remarkable way God's hand guides in and through human events. I don't know. I kind of wrote that myself, but I think that's probably a pretty fair summary of the book of Esther. Two Jewish people, their names are Mordecai. They saved the Jewish people from genocide in the Persian Empire. And again, even though the name of God is not mentioned, it shows in a remarkable way his hand through all these events. How does the book of Esther, the message of it, advance God's plan of redemption? Well, one thing, it shows how God kept and keeps the Jewish people alive despite attempted genocide against them. I'm wondering, is it fair to say that, no, I don't think you would say, well, I don't know, it's maybe debatable, if you would say that this was the first attempted genocide of the Jews. I don't know. But it's certainly a prominent one. And to see how God miraculously preserved them and blessed them through this shows that even though the Jews have been targeted for this kind of thing, they have been preserved from it. But the book of Esther also shows how God's work is often behind the scenes. The name of God does not appear in the book of Esther, but his hand, his providence is evident throughout. And again, this shows how God works out his plan through history. Next up, we're already to our charts here. We got our Old Testament books. we're divided into 4 columns. Is the book of Esther among the books of the law? Is the book of Esther among the books of poetry? Is the book of Esther among the prophetic books? We're only left with one possibility. It is among the historic books of the Bible, the historic books of the Old Testament, the books that we have been studying in this column all throughout this semester. And we see that of the historical books, it is the last of the historical books, though curiously, it is not the last chronologically. Isn't that kind of interesting? The end part of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah happened chronologically after the events of the book of Esther. Okay? Next, we have our chart. Thank you to the people at the Open Bible for inspiring these charts to me. First, we have it divided into 2 portions. The first 4 chapters concern the threat to the Jews. The next 6 chapters describe the triumph of the Jews. Number 2, we have as a topic here the feasts of Ahasuerus in the first 4 chapters and the grave danger that came upon the Jewish people. Then in the next 6 chapters, we have the feasts of Esther, feast that she was throwing for the king, and Haman, this associate of the king's, and Purim, and then we have the great deliverance that God wrought. That's the topic. Next, we have in the first 4 chapters, through chapter 2, we have the selection of Esther as a queen, and then we have the formulation of the plot by Haman. Next, you have starting at chapter 5, the triumph of Mordecai over Haman, which is hilarious. It's flat out hilarious. That's all you can say about it. And then you have the triumph, you have the triumph of Israel over her enemies for chapters 8 through chapter 10. Okay, are we good? Are we good? The good thing about Esther is a simple enough book. You can kind of feel like you get your arms around it, so to speak. The events take place over a period of about 10 years in total, we suppose. Chronologically, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at this sliver here. Now, when you think that if you're going to include the book of Chronicles, the history that we've covered goes all the way back to here, though really it began in earnest with the book of Joshua. So we've been taking a look at this basic history here, and this little red sliver, this is what concerns the book of Esther here at this point. Okay? Just for point of comparison, look at how I switch between these slides. Okay, ready? There's Esther, there's Ezra. Okay? Esther, Ezra, and then now here's Nehemiah. There's Nehemiah. Okay, got it? So you see where Esther figures in with them chronologically. Okay? And if that wasn't enough, if I need to beat this horse a little bit more, I'm going to do it. Here, you have another kind of chart here. You have Ezra chapters 1 through 6. You have Ezra chapters 7 through 10. And then you have Nehemiah chapters 1 through 13. You can see right in here is where the book of Esther is, in between 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra. Is that pretty much clear to everybody? If it wasn't clear, I'm going to give you one more. Temple rebuilt here. There's a gap, and the book of Esther happens within that gap. Then the people are reformed here in the book of Ezra. Then there's a gap of 12 years. Then the wall is rebuilt in Nehemiah. Then Nehemiah comes back again, and then there's 400 silent years. Okay, see that? Nice chart, isn't that? That chart is up on last week's assignment page, not this week's. I didn't put it up again because you could have got it last week as well. All right, and then finally, the location of the book of Esther. Interestingly enough, it happens in Persia. Now, throughout these historical books that we've been taking a look at, the vast majority of the action has happened in what we would call the Holy Land of Judah and Samaria and the region of Galilee and all that, Israel, so to speak. The book of Esther is different. Its action takes place not in Israel at all. It's not even mentioned. No, it all takes place in Persia. It's the book of exile. Okay? And it shows, if I could say this, that God knew how to take care of his people even out of the promised land. You know, it's not like they needed the magic of the promised land. No, God knew how to take care of them until he would bring them back securely into the land. Just take a look so you got an idea of what the Persian Empire was like. The Persian Empire during the time of Esther looked something like this. And if you want to take a look, I mean, it included all the way up at its height, even up this into Greece, but it was beaten back right here. This is the part of Greece that they were trying to overcome. There's Salamis, that great Battle of Salamis down there. And this is the part that they were trying to overcome that they could not, and which led to the eventual fall of the Persian Empire. But you could see this was a mighty empire, was it not? I mean, this covers a lot of ground. In particular, it's covering Jerusalem and Samaria right there, Judah, Samaria, this area here, which is, of course, the land of Israel. So this is the Persian Empire at the time of Esther. Just to give you one more look at it, this is Shushan, the city where the events take place. This is where the king and his harem were. So you have that there. I'll just go back so you can see where it is in the middle, pretty much, of the Persian Empire. By the way, modern day Persians, we call them Iranians, right? These are the people from Iran. And their language is, and their customs and this, they're very aware of their heritage back. And some of them, they don't want to be called Iranians. Have you ever spoken to them? No, they say, I'm Persian. And I can dig it. You know, they don't want to be identified with that. They're thinking of their long, glorious history. Okay, next, let's kind of walk ourselves through the book, shall we? Well, the first thing we have in the book of Esther is we have the divorce and removal of Queen Vashti, the wife of Ahasuerus. Does anyone want to tell me the circumstances of the removal of Queen Vashti? What happened? Why'd they boot her out? Yes.
The king was throwing a feast for him and his nobles before.
Big party, yeah.
Before he was going to try to attack Greece.
Yeah.
And the nobles wanted to see his wife to show off her beauty.
Yeah.
And that she didn't want to be treated in such a way, so she refused. When the king called her, she refused to come. And the nobles saw it as women as an act of defiance to the king and men. So they said, like, hey, you need to take her out because our wives, if they hear about this, they're going to treat us with disrespect.
Ooh, pretty soon, who knows what's going to happen? Exactly. Pretty soon they're going to have the right to vote or something like that. You better look out. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there's sort of a big debate. Okay, the debate is, and I don't know how to put this delicately, was the request for the king to come out in some state of undress, in some immodest way. And you'll get commentators that debate it back and forth. Whatever it was, she seems to be complimented, right? We look up to Queen Vashti. She's like, she wasn't going to, submit to this drunken debauch that they had going on. And she just said, no way. The last thing I want to do is be paraded out in front of a bunch of drunken men, whether it's, in some immodest way or not. And so she was having nothing to do with it. So they deposed her as queen. And then what happened after that? He goes off and does his battle, right? And what happens? Yeah, he gets whooped pretty bad. He comes back and he finds comfort back in his harem, and he turns his attention to his harem. You guys kind of get the cultural significance of the harem. And again, I kind of want to put this delicately. Yes, the harem was about sex, so that the king could have a vast array of available sexual partners. Yes, that was an aspect of it. But it wasn't just about that at all. It was also about status and prestige and importance. Look at all these beautiful women and all this. First of all, I can have them and other men cannot. That was a big part of it. It's kind of an extra that. But I can support them. It's nothing for me to support 100 or however many women it would be. It's just that's the way it is, and this shows my wealth and my importance and my greatness. Okay. So Esther chapter 2 comes along, and we have the preparation and the selection of Esther as the wife of Ahasuerus. The question is, how did they had something of a beauty pageant, didn't they? like, Persian, Next Queen reality show or something like that. It was really something like that. And so they were looking for, this beauty pageant, this. Now, here's kind of the question. How did Esther get in the beauty pageant? Pardon me? Does it say? Yeah, I don't think it says. I'm wondering. There you go. Best answer of all. But we're not told. And by the way, this kind of brings up a little bit of a controversy. Some people say, oh, how immodest it was for Esther to take part in this. Well, you know what? And I'll talk about it at the end, but I may as well just mention now. Look, we have no idea whether or not she was a willing participant in this. It really might have been quite the kind of thing where in the different ends of the province that the word goes out to the governor of a province. He goes, you better send 3 beautiful women to come be a part of the king's harem. You go out and find the most beautiful women in your province and you send them. I mean, and that's very much how she may have had no choice in the matter. We're really not told. So she comes and she undergoes these preparations as part of the team of women from whom the king is going to choose a new wife, a new king. A new wife, a new queen. So it's kind of cool part of the book of Esther. It describes all these beauty treatments that she'd get. And she got special favor with the... So, I mean, basically, she had like a year of daily spa stuff, which would be pretty cool for Esther. And you think, man, pretty enviable life. Well, yes and no. Because basically, if the king chose you among all those other women, by the way, does it say how many other women there were? I'm trying to remember. I don't remember it. Okay, but if the king chose you among all those other women, what was the prize for being chosen? Right, you get to be the queen. What was the consolation prize? What if you lost? Roy, what happens if you lose?
Sorry, pal.
Well, but what happens to you?
Well, you have a nice spa treatment, but you're out of the kingdom and stuff, or right out of where the king lives.
No.
Harem or no?
Yeah, you're in the harem.
Oh, okay.
Basically what the harem means is you're probably never going to see the king again. Maybe, probably not. You're probably never going to see the king again, but you're not going to be able to be married to anybody else. You're probably going to die a childless widow Well, not technically a widow. You're part of the king's harem, but you may as well be a widow. You're well fed. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's an important point to make. Such as it is, it's not a bad life. You know what I mean? You could be, scavenging for food in a dump. You're not like that. But there's a lot of things that are denied to you. So, I mean, look, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. But that was the price for losing. Then we have in Esther chapter 2 the discovery that Mordecai, the cousin of Esther, reveals a plot to murder the king. So apparently there was this plot to murder the king. Mordecai finds out about it. He warns the king and his officials. They find the guys, they hang them, they write it down in the records, and then that's it. But nothing special is done for Mordecai, but he does, save the king from this assassination plot. Okay? This is called, in the business, kind of laying the backstory here. Because then we come up next, the promotion of Haman, his disappointment and his plot to murder the Jews. Okay, so Haman comes along, and he's another guy in the government of King Ahasuerus, and he's lifted up to very high prominence. He's the rising star, the boy wonder. He's really successful, and as being a very successful man, everybody's supposed to bow down to him. When he goes down the street, when he's riding in his chariot or being carried by the guys, you think of a guy like Haman as arrogant enough to be carried around like this. He's being carried around, and everybody bows down to him because he's like this with the king, just right there. Everybody bows down to him except for one guy. Who doesn't bow down to him? Mordecai. And this makes Haman so mad that what does he say? Is it enough for him just to kill Mordecai? No, he says, I'm going to kill all the Jews. I'm going to kill them all. Those Jewish people, I hate them. I want to kill them all. It's kind of interesting. And again, one of the things you appreciate about the book of Esther is just how brilliantly it's written. Haman, I should say, he has everything going for him, but the fact that one guy doesn't bow down before him ruins his whole life. Isn't that just so ingrained in human nature? You know, you could have everything. Everything's laid out before you. I mean, everything's wonderful, but one person doesn't, kowtow before you, doesn't bow down before you. Man, forget it. My whole life is ruined. It just goes to show how that's really typical. So, Mordecai, Haman, I always get those names mixed up. Haman manipulates the king into making a decree that all the Jews will be murdered. Okay, on a certain time at a certain place, and that they will be murdered by the common people of the kingdom. And basically the way he does it is he sweetens it like this. He says, well, if you kill a Jew, you get to take all their stuff. Well, suddenly that made it very attractive for the man in the Persian street to say, I really like my Jewish neighbor's stuff. I can just kill him on this day and take all his stuff. So then Mordecai hears of this. Yes?
Would that include all the Jews that Zerubbabel and
Now that's a very good question. Would that include? I don't think so, because that's kind of a distant part of the empire, that they probably wouldn't even heard of such a decree. I mean, technically it might have been true that it applied to them, but they were such a distant part of the empire that it probably did not apply.
Mm-hmm. So when talking about like Haman wanting to kill all the Jews, it might not have been all of them. If his plan worked, it might have.
Okay, it would not have been every last Jewish person on the face of the earth, but it would have been a very large percentage of them. Yeah. It might have been a big enough percentage so that the Jewish people essentially perished from the earth. I mean, this was a very serious thing. Now, Mordecai comes and he warns Esther and gives him this great challenge. And the challenge is basically this. We saw it before. Don't think that you're going to escape. God will deliver us one way or another, but don't think you're going to escape. But who knows, maybe it was such a time as this that God has put you in. Oh, we forgot to say that Esther won the contest. I didn't even put that up there. But she wins. Isn't that nice? Did you guys see those movies about Esther that have been done in the last couple of years? There have been a couple movies. Weren't any of them any good? I never watched them. No? No, Destiny says no. No? A little corny? Yeah. Oh, so it's really long?
No, they're just not very good.
Oh. No, the Cecil B. DeMille 10 Commandments, I thought that was pretty good. The old one, Charlton Heston? Well, yeah, it's a long movie. I'll give you that. It's a long movie. But man, you could make the greatest story in the world about this thing in Esther. I mean, with a script like that, man. Okay, so anyway, Esther wins. And Mordecai's whole appeal, I mean, it makes perfect sense. God has put you this close to the king. You have a place of influence. Now, here's the other thing about it. Does the king even know that Esther is Jewish? Doesn't even know. God's put you this close to the king. Do something about this. Well, okay, the difficulty in this is that she's this close to the king, but she's separated by a wide gulf of protocol. Because in the protocol of that day, she is not permitted to just go in and say, hey, hubby, what's going on? You know, she doesn't exactly wake up in the morning next to him. It doesn't work out like that. They're separated. I mean, they live apart geographically, maybe in the same palace, but I mean in different parts of the palace. And she can't just barge in, and especially what happened to the previous queen who didn't know her place. Well, she wasn't killed, as far as we know. She was just, put out. It didn't work. Let's just put it that way. So she has some legitimate reason to be very hesitant, very filled with trepidation about all of this. And that's her concern. Okay? Then we come into part 2. So what does she do? Does she burst in to King Ahasuerus and say, please save me, don't kill me? No, what does she do? With a lot of courage, she goes in uninvited to the king's throne room. Now, why did that take courage to go in uninvited? Pardon me? She could get killed. And what was the sign that the king received her? Yeah, he would stretch it forth in some way, in that. It'd be kind of like in the Roman world, either this or this, So she goes in there, and everybody's like, oh, Queen Esther came in without an invitation. There she's standing, and she's just kind of waiting and waiting. Is it going to be thumbs up or thumbs down? The king extends his scepter and says, okay, come on over. So she comes in, and what's her request? Requested, oh, please save us, king. Please save us. No, what does she request? Man, she's smart. This is the best story of all. What's her request?
Dinner.
Yeah. King, I wouldn't come unless this was really important. Would you please have dinner with me tonight? Hey, he goes, yeah, sure. That sounds pretty good. They'd get it catered in. She wasn't going to do the cooking or anything. So he's going to have dinner with me tonight. And they also invite who to the dinner? Haman. Okay, they invite Haman. So, Haman, meanwhile, is working furiously on his plot to kill Mordecai. And what does Haman build to kill Mordecai? All right, I got to explain something about the gallows. The gallows was not a place where you would hang somebody by the neck. I used to have the words in German for this. See if I have it in my paper still. Gallows. Der Galgen. Okay? That's what a gallows is. Yeah? Der Galgen. Okay, so check this out. The gallows was, when we say gallows, you think of a place where you hang somebody. That wasn't it in the Persian Empire. What they would do, what a gallows was, it was a high raised thing, but it basically had a stake that you would impale a body upon. I mean, basically just, yeah. Not pretty, okay? Yeah, I mean, huge. Just bad. And what's funny about it is nothing makes Haman happier than building this gallows and knowing that he's going to kill. I mean, he's just like the happiest guy in the world. He's just so happy. I'm going to kill Mordecai. He's just so happy about it. And he's happy. Why else is he happy? He's happy because he got invited to dinner with the king and the queen. Doesn't get higher than that. And, okay, they have their first dinner. What does Esther do at the first dinner? Does she say, oh, king, please save me. Don't kill me. Don't kill the Jewish people. Is that what she asked for? What did she ask for at the first dinner? Yeah, would you come back to dinner tomorrow night? I mean, that's just great. And who else gets invited to dinner the next night? Haman. So Haman is he's so happy. He's so happy because tomorrow Mordecai's going to be dead. Nothing makes me happier than that. Except there might be one thing that makes me happier than Mordecai being dead. It's having dinner with the king and queen again. He goes, I am the luckiest man in the world. As he goes down to sleep. Okay, then the king goes to sleep that night. Or should I say, he tries to go to sleep. Let me show a slide. It's not of him sleeping. It's of this. This man is master over this, but he's not master of one night's sleep. Isn't that interesting? A guy who is so powerful to have the power of life and death in this whole empire, yet he's not the master over 1 hour of sleep in his life. So he can't sleep. So what does he do? He calls in the butler and he says, Butler, I can't sleep. Would you read me something? Read me a bedtime story. Butler says, okay, man. He grabs something off the wall and what does he read? What does he read to the king? The Chronicles, and what's recorded in the Chronicles?
Saving of him from being assassinated.
When Mordecai saved his life by, he just, okay, well, let's do this. Let's open up the scroll. Let me start reading here. Well, there was a guy named Mordecai who came, and there was a plot to kill you, and he informed on it. We killed those guys who wanted to kill you. And then what question does Ahasuerus ask? He says, wait, stop reading the story. Did we do anything good for this guy who saved my life? Now, again, you can see where in Ahasuerus' mind, it's a good thing to reveal plots to assassinate him. You want to encourage people to reveal plots to assassinate you. So you better reward the people who reveal plots to assassinate you. Saying, stop. What did we do for this guy? And what is the response from the guy who's reading, the guy reading him the bedtime story? What does he say? No, he goes, whoa, let me read this again. No, we didn't do anything for him. So the king's thinking, I gotta do something for this guy who saved my life. Just then, who walks into the court? Yes?
Wouldn't it be, just this whole scenario, wouldn't that be a good example of God's providence?
Oh. Can you believe it? He opened up into that exact place. The sleepless night, the exact place, all this stuff, totally. This is the hand of God throughout. So who's walking through the court of the king just at this time? Haman. Haman's like, yes, I'm going to kill Mordecai. I'm going to dinner. And then if this day could not get any better whatsoever, the king says, oh, wait, Haman, man, glad to see you. I didn't know you were walking around. I got a question for you. What should be done for the man whom the king really wants to honor? Now, who's the king thinking of? Who's Haman thinking of? Haman. Haman is like, oh, this is the sweetest ever. This is the sweetest ever. I know how this is going to happen. He's just thinking, I didn't think this day could get any better, but it does. It does. Because, okay, king, this is what you need to do. And I forget all the individuals. You got to put your ring on his finger. Isn't that it? You got to put his robe on his back. You got to put him on your best stallion. And then you got to parade him through the streets of the capital, shouting out, this is what the king does for the man he wants to honor, And he could see himself. Man, he's going like this when he's telling the king, because he can just imagine himself on that horse. He's just like, yes, yes, yes. What does the king say? Man, this is just the most funny part of the whole book. He goes, Haman, that's great. Go find Mordecai and put him on that horse. And tell you what, you lead him around the thing tomorrow. And I mean, you could just imagine, it is like somebody hit him in the head with a baseball bat. Mordecai, I hate that guy. I hate him. I built this gallows to kill him, and tomorrow I got to parade him through the streets. Now who had the sleepless night? It was Haman, man. He couldn't think of that. He cannot believe that the next day he has to put Mordecai on a horse and walk him through. Can you imagine just how great Mordecai felt about all of that? Because he knew Haman hated him. He knew it. He's like, yeah, thank you, Haman. Thank you. Little faster now. No, slow it down a little bit, Could we stop at this place? I want to get a little falafel. How about that? You know what I mean? It's just the best day ever. So Haman comes back from that totally wiped out, totally depressed. And then he gets the news. What's the news? You got a dinner invitation to go to. Put on your tuxedo and get over to the palace. You're having dinner with the king and the queen. When he gets over to have dinner with the king and the queen, now Esther gets down to business, right? And what does she say? She says, king, if it was just me, I wouldn't say anything. But here's the problem. Not only does somebody want to kill me, they want to kill all my people. That's why I'm appealing to you. If it was just me, I wouldn't say a thing. She's kind of selling it there to him. I mean, she does a great job of it. I would die gladly, king. I don't want to make any trouble. I wouldn't trouble you if it was just my death. And the king goes, whoa, wait a minute, are you kidding me? who would want to kill you? I can't believe this. What does Esther say? That guy. Hey, it is just the best ever. Yeah, that guy. And it's like, what? And then it comes out, she's Jewish. And the king is absolutely enraged. He leaves the room. He's so enraged. It's just like so filled with, and part of the reason why he's filled with rage is because he's instantly uncovered Haman's scam, how Haman manipulated him to sign this death order against the Jews. But he's been tricked into it. And the problem is that the law with the Medes and the Persians is once they make a law, you can't change it. The king cannot change it. He cannot take it back. And he is so furious that he leaves the room. What does Haman do? He's going to go to Esther and beg for his life. Beg, oh, Esther, please. But what happens? He trips and he sprawls out over Esther. And then what happens? The king comes in. I mean, man, this is like Marx Brothers stuff, man. It's just great. The king comes in and he's sprawled out over. And he goes, you got to be kidding me, man. I just left the room 5 seconds ago and this. And so what does he say? He say, get this guy out of here, execute him. And somebody very helpfully says, hey, you know what? There's a gallows built right in town here. It's not being used for anything. How about that? And Haman gets executed on the same gallows that he intended to execute Mordecai on and all the Jews. Now, you would think, okay, end of the story, this. But actually, it's kind of interesting what happens next. They couldn't change the law of the Medes and the Persians. The king couldn't change that law. So what does he do? He makes another law that gives the Jews the power to defend themselves. He gives them every right, every power, every ability to defend themselves, and they were able to do it. And so the Jews were able to defend themselves, and nothing happened on that day because they were ready, they were waiting, and the book ends with Mordecai being promoted. I mean, look, isn't that the best story ever? It is just a great, great story. So, the celebration of triumph, Esther 9 and 10. Now, where do we find Jesus in the book of Esther? Well, number one, we find the providential hand of Jesus working through history. I mean, look, this is Jesus working in and through history. This is his hand at work, and we'll see that more in just a minute. But another thing we notice is we see Jesus as our advocate before the throne. Is that not Esther? Esther was the advocate of the people of God before the throne of the king. Don't you wish you had an advocate like that? Don't you wish you had somebody who would intercede for you before the throne of the king? You do. Jesus is that advocate. And it's interesting, Esther, if you take the name to mean morning star, Jesus himself is that bright and morning star. So not only would we say that God is all over the book of Esther without mentioning his name, we would say Jesus is all over the book of Esther without mentioning his name. I mean, after all, when you take a look at it, look at the hand of God at work in the book of Esther. God arranged for the noble Queen Vashti to lose her place. That's how the whole thing began. God arranged for a competition to replace Queen Vashti. How unusual is that? But why doesn't the king just say, this woman pleases me, she's the next king? No, God arranged there to be a competition. God arranged for Esther to enter the competition. God arranged special favor for Esther among the other women. God arranged for Mordecai to have access both to Esther and the affairs of the kingdom so that he could save the king's life. God arranged for the lot that was cast to give 11 months warning before the evil event. When Haman is planning this thing against the Jews and this secret agreement that he's going to trick the king into doing, how does he do it? He says, well, we got to pick a day to massacre the Jews. What day would it be? He rolls the dice and a date comes up for 11 months. Do you realize that if the date would have come up 1 month later, there probably wouldn't have been time to save the Jews? Who was guiding those dice to come up with a day that was 11 months later? This was the Lord. It was the Lord all the way. God arranged that the decree command that the Jews be killed by private hands instead of by the army of Persia, which would have been much more difficult to stop. Do you understand that if a decree would have went out that the army of Persia was to execute all the Jewish people, then it would have been much harder for the Jewish people to defend themselves against professional army. But when it's your friends and your neighbors, look, you can kind of calm them down and keep them down pretty good. And that's exactly what happened. God arranged that Haman restrain his anger and not kill Mordecai immediately. He wanted to kill Mordecai right away. But God worked through his friends to say, no, hold off for a little bit. And that's what he did. God arranged for Esther to delay her request, first asking for a banquet with the king, and then another banquet. Why was that timing so important? Because there had to be a sleepless night where God would do his work. God arranged for Haman's anger to come to a peak on one particular day. God arranged for Ahasuerus to have a sleepless night. God arranged for Ahasuerus to pick up a certain book in his sleepless night. God arranged for Ahasuerus to read the passage about Mordecai in that particular book. Do you see? The hand of God is all over the book of Esther. You could say that the theme of the book of Esther is Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. It wasn't written yet, but it's lived out through the book of Esther. There's no doubt about it. Now, one of the fascinating things that I see about the book of Esther is this. God was at work. Does anybody doubt this? God was at work. I mean, I think it's pretty overwhelming, that list I just showed. Yet everybody acted according to their own will and their own choices. You know, did God make Haman do what he did? No. Did God make Mordecai or Esther or the king do what they? No. Everybody acted according to the inclination of their own will, and God weaved it together perfectly in his providential plan. He didn't have to coerce anybody to do anything. And really we find just this remarkable way that God takes the freely chosen actions of men and women and he weaves them within his glorious will. That's what we find in a very, very exciting way in the book of Esther. All right. What if Esther was not in the Bible? Well, I think we could ask a couple of questions. Number one, does God really move where his name is not obviously seen? You might, well, does he really? I mean, does it? Yes, God can move even where his name is not obviously seen. Number two, does the work of God exclude the choices and actions of people? No way. God can do his work in and through the actions of people and can still work in a powerful and wonderful way. Does God allow his people to be tested? You better believe he does. God allowed the Jewish people to be severely tested in the midst of this. Next question, how committed is God to the survival of the Jewish people? Listen, you will never find a people on this earth that have had genocide attempted against them as many times as the Jewish people. And yet God sustains them. God prospers them because it is in his providential plan of the ages to do so. And this is just how God moves. It also goes to show you that there's something satanic in this Jewish genocide impulse. There's something satanic in it. God is committed to the survival of Jewish people. And then finally, I think a good question that it answers, does God have a sense of humor? And you better believe it. The book of Esther is just flat out funny. But funny in a real way, in things that really would happen. All right, problem passages in Esther. I can only think of one. It's that question that we discussed at the very beginning. Was it right for Esther to take part in a pagan beauty contest and become part of Xerxes' harem? Well, first of all, number one, we don't know if Esther was a willing participant or not. It's entirely possible that she was not. But you know what? Let's just say that Esther was wrong in what she did. Maybe she was a starry-eyed kid. Like, oh, and maybe she didn't even pray before she entered the contest. Maybe she's just like all caught up with it, and she's beautiful, and she's young, and I'm going to do this. Maybe that makes something. Maybe that's, you know what? Do you see? God even used that, if that was the case. So we don't have to demand that Esther be this amazing woman of faith and piety before she enters into any of this. No, God, if it wasn't in her before, God developed it along the way. And if he did, then that's just another part of the really wonderful story of Esther. That's a long train signal. All right. What else do we got about the book of Esther, folks? Anything? Questions? Yes.
Three things. One thing that I find really interesting in talking about it was where the king says, I will give you up to half of my kingdom, and Herod said that also. You find those two instances in the Bible. One guy could give his kingdom, but the other guy couldn't. Herod, who was just a little puppet.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of interesting that that they use those terms.
Yeah, it almost as if that phrase, "I give you up to half of my kingdom," is a proverbial phrase that kind of meant, "I'll give you everything I can." Yeah.
And then the other part was where they cast lots, because that's what Purim means.
That's right.
And then in the book of Proverbs, it says, "Man casts lots, but God determines the outcome," I believe is what it says.
Yes.
And then I remember when you're preaching, when we were going through the book of Acts several years ago, where when they chose the replacement for Judas, they cast lots. I forget how you said that.
Well, listen, there's times when, let me say, you might think that rolling dice to determine the will of God is a very bad way to do. And listen, I don't recommend it. Nobody get me wrong on this. But I'm saying the way that a lot of Christians determine the will of God, they would be better to roll dice than the way that a lot of Christians determine the will of God. They determine it just according to, how they feel, or what everybody else says, or, this or that, or what the world thinks, or this or that. Man, you'd do better just to roll dice. So I don't recommend it, but God can work even through that.
And then the thing with where Haman came from, right? Wasn't he a descendant of Agag, or?
Yes.
And how Saul had been told to destroy.
This was the legacy of Saul's disobedience for not finishing off the Amalekites, because King Agag, his descendant, lived on through Haman. Absolutely. Yes.
Do you know how close the night Esther revealed Haman's plan, how close that was to the actual day of it being executed?
Does it say? I think it was like 4 or 5 months later.
Okay.
I think it was something like that. I think it says there in the text.
Okay.
They had time, several weeks. Kenny.
So, since he made the law that that could happen to Jewish people, if someone figured out, in another scenario, if someone on that day, someone found out Esther was Jewish, could they just march into the palace and be like, "Hey, I want to kill her" or something? Since he made that law, would he stand aside and let that happen, or
No, probably not. Esther was probably fairly safe in that. This was something that would apply to just people out in the community. But someone as preserved as Esther, that was not her immediate danger. But the fact that there were enemies allowed to strengthen themselves against the Jews, she eventually would have gotten it. Yes?
Chapter 8, when it says that then many of the people of the land became Jews.
Yes.
Does that mean that they started following their God, or they started following their traditions?
Yes, I would think so. They became proselytes, yes. Yeah, now, you could say to what extent, because there was this category in the ancient world of the full convert to Judaism, and then there was the category of the God-fearer. the Gentile who almost became a full convert, but certainly adopted the customs and the synagogue practices of that. So, you could say which one it was fully, but it was one or the other. Yes?
Do we know what position Haman, like, they had? I think he was over the officials, but I don't remember if it said exactly what it was.
Yeah. Well, it'd be like a prime minister. That's like literally what you would call it. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Would it be too crazy after the Jews, because obviously they knew that people were coming for them months ahead of time, would it be too crazy for them to just leave, or that would just be too much of
Well, here's the thing. They didn't want to leave. They had established lives and businesses and, family and stuff there. So they didn't want to leave. Yeah. So theoretically they could have, but no, they didn't want to. Yes, Bill.
I've wondered about saving the Jews, why God allowed all the Jews to be killed in World War II. Why?
Well, look, those weren't the only times. I mean, there were other massive genocidal things under the Romans, under the European pogroms in the Middle Ages. And all you can say, I mean, perhaps an unanswerable question, why? But the important thing is to see is that they weren't eliminated. What was desired to happen against them was not fulfilled.
These are his people, but like 6 million of them.
That's right.
Seems so hard.
That's right. Anybody else? All right, well, this ends the teaching portion of our semester. So, Father, we thank you. We thank you for a good semester together. We thank you, Lord, for enlightening our understanding about your word. And I pray for every one of these students, Lord. I pray that for every one, that from this day forward, as they spend any time in these wonderful books of the Old Testament, that, Lord, you would just help them to understand better and to hear your voice and to gain more from the benefit of your Spirit in and through these books. Do it, Lord, for your glory, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.